Welcome, everybody, to the program today. I welcome to the show James Fetzer of jamesfetzer.org. He's amazing guy, conspiracy guy. Isn't that right, James?
Yes. Among my other traits, yes.
Well, you've gotten quite a reputation of blowing the whistle on so many things that people think were actual occurrences, but as it turns out, they really, really look like they were orchestrated events for some nefarious purpose.
Well, Paul, Mark Twain observed that it's easier to fool a man than to convince him he's been fooled. So I do collaborative research. I bring together groups of experts that sort these things out, people who are experienced and have proficiency in areas where I do not. For example, in relation to JFK, a world authority on the human brain, who is also an expert on wound ballistics, a PhD in physics, who is also an MD and board certified in radiation oncology, he's an expert in the interpretation of x-rays, a physician who's actually been in trauma room number 1 when JFK's moribund body was brought in, and then 2 days later responsible for the care and treatment of the alleged assassin Lee Oswald. I've done this over and over with JFK, with 9/11, with Sandy Hook, with a Boston bombing, Orlando, Dallas, Charlottesville, Parkland, even Las Vegas, Paul. So it's astounding that of all those I just enumerated, I know of only one dead body, and that's supposed to be Stephen Paddock, the shooter in Las Vegas. And somehow the body that was subject to autopsy didn't correspond in physical features to his wildlife, his fishing and game cards. So we even have doubts about who that was. But in all the other cases, all those deaths we reported, whether it's 17 at Parkland, 50 plus Las Vegas, 20 children and 6 adults at Sandy Hook, it was all fake, totally fake. And I not only do the research, Paul, where because we're collaborating, we're essentially vetting one another and reducing dramatically the probability that we might be wrong publishing these books. Indeed, when I first published Nobody Died at Sandy Hook, it was a FEMA drill to promote gun control in 2015. Amazon banned the book less than a month after it had been put on sale, even though it sold over nearly 500 copies, Paul. You'd think if you're a book distributor, you'd like a book that sold nearly 500 copies in its first month. So that Mike Palachek, my co-editor, and I recognized we had to found our own outlet and did with moonrockbooks.com, where you can find all those books available. Of the 12 volumes we published at Moonrock Books, Paul, 6 have been banned by Amazon, and I got to claim that as the indoor record.
Wow. So moonrockbooks.com?
Yes.
And they can get all of your books there and not just the unbanned ones.
Well, these are the majority of my books on conspiracy research. Now, I had 3 previous books on JFK: Assassination Science, 1998, Murder in Dealey Plaza, 2000, The Great Zapruder Film Hoax, 2003. I had an earlier book on 9/11, The 9/11 Conspiracy, The Scamming of America, 2007. In the meanwhile, I had a book in 2004 on the strange death of Senator Paul Wellstone, co-authored with Don Ferreros Jacobs, where I brought in other experts, one in electromagnetism, where we ascertained how the plane had been taken down, which was creating an electromagnetic field, and then resetting the global positioning network, which no one thought before could be done, in order to bring the pilots in to the kill zone 2 miles short of the airport, which would have been an easy land under ordinary circumstances.
Well, Paul Wellstone, Sonny Bono, that's just a couple of names of politicians that started to see something going wrong, and they made it known that they intended to get to the bottom of it. And then next thing you know, Sonny Bono, he has a skiing accident, and Paul Wellstone's plane crashes when, just about any pilot could have brought that plane in safely.
That's right. And just give you an indication of what was going on there, Wolf Blitzer was claiming how they closed the airport, so that tells you what's going on. He was also claiming the weather was terrible. Well, I have photographs that were taken in the area. The weather wasn't terrible. They claimed there was, frozen rain, hail, and all that. It's false. It didn't happen. I was only 60 miles away in my office on the Duluth campus of the University of Minnesota when the crash took place. I was being interviewed by a reporter for an alternative newspaper in the area. And when he said, well, we'll see what happens with the box, the black box, and I told him there won't be one. Actually, that plane had two pilots when it only required one. It was an Air King. It was a wonderful aircraft, like the Rolls Royce of small craft. And while I believe there actually was a black box, the way they did it, when they nullified all the computerized components in the plane by the electromagnetic field, so that a school superintendent in the vicinity heard these popping sounds he thought were rifle shots being fired at the plane, but not so. It was these computer components popping, which included the not only the stall warning, navigation, communication system, but the tilt of the props. It set something they couldn't explain after was why the props were on idle. They were actually below idle, meaning that once they took that out, all they had was the glide ratio, which with that plane was like 1 to 100. So it'd go 100 feet or 100 yards. For every 1 foot or 1 yard, it would descend vertically. And the pilots tried to steer it into a soft wooded area. But after the crash, which broke off the wings, by the way, and the tail, where the wings are filled with the fuel. So there was a very peculiar fire that endured for 7 hours, and it was so intense the fire department couldn't put it out. So they reduced the entire plane to charcoal to ensure there wouldn't be any remains of those computerized components that had been popped in order to make it happen. They had to have coated it with magnesium or thermite or something like that. It was such an intense fire they couldn't put it out for 7 hours.
Wow. And this this kind of like jet fuel melting the superstructure of
it's absurd. Jet fuel, even under ideal conditions, when it's fed pure oxygen, gets 1,000 degrees short of what it would have taken to weaken or cause the steel to melt. In fact, the designs of the building was such it wasn't even physically possible for them to collapse, Paul. It wasn't even physically possible. For example,
we're talking about the Twin Towers right now.
Yeah, I'm talking the Twin Towers.
Okay.
Yeah. I have a retired high school math, physics, chemistry teacher, a really smart guy, who did elementary calculation and discovered for every 1 unit of downward force, say from the top 16 floors of the North Tower, there were 199 units of upward force. So it wasn't even possible they could have collapsed. And when they talk about planes having entered the building, that was another physical impossibility. It turns out, given the design of the buildings, where you had these, it was a tube within a tube design. So you had 47 massive core columns within the inner tube. And then you had 230 within the outer tube, which were very formidable steel. And they were connected by steel trusses filled with 4 to 8 inches of concrete, so that every floor represented, because the buildings were 280 feet on a side, an acre of concrete on a steel truss. Had a plane tried to enter, it would have crumpled external to the building. Body, seats, luggage, tail, wings fall into the ground. The engines, yes, which are virtually indestructible, might have ended, but not the plane. So that what we're shown is a fantasy, a physical impossibility. It's interesting you do logical thinking, because I offered courses in logic, critical thinking, and scientific reasoning for 35 years to my college students. And I'd explain, if they'd come to the university to take only one course, this was the course they ought to take, because it would enable them to reason through other situations, not allow themselves to be duped, whether it's by a used car salesman or an editorial writer or a politician, all of whom specialize in committing elementary fallacies, such as what's known as special pleading, only citing the evidence favorable to your side and ignoring the rest, which we get all the time, sad to say, for example, with this COVID nonsense.
And that is about as far as we can go on a censored platform. Please check the description of this program for links to where you can see the rest of the show.